हेलो फ्रेंड्स, केजी क्लासेस में आपका स्वागत है। आज हम आपको लाइफ एंड वर्क्स ऑफ जोसेफ एडिसन के बारे में बताएंगे। हिज बर्थ एंड पेरेंटेज। जोसेफ एडिसन वाज बोर्न ऑन May 1st, 1672 at Milestone near Ambrosburg in Wiltshire. His father, Mr. Lancelot Edison, was a rector and the dean of Lichfield. At the time of his birth, Edison was so puny and frail that he was christened the same day, lest he should live. The family of Edison was gifted with geniality and good cheer. Still, in one of his essays, Tatler number 25 gives his impression about the family of Edison. The boys behaved themselves very early with a manly friendship, and their sister, instead of gross familiarities and impertinent freedoms in behavior, usual in other houses, was always treated by them with as much complaisance as any other young lady of their acquaintance. If it was an unspeakable pleasure to visit or sit at a meal in that family, I have often seen the old man's heart flow at his eyes with joy upon occasions which would appear indifferent to such as were strangers to the turn of his mind. But a very slight accident wherein he saw his children's goodwill to one another created in him the godlike pleasure of loving them because they loved each other. His education. Edison's education began at home, where he first received a strong impression of piety. But he received his early formal education first at Lichfield under the care of Mr. Shaw, then at Carterhouse School, where he made acquaintance with Steele, who, realizing his sprouting abilities, did not hesitate to live under a habitual subjection to the predominating genius of Edison. Here, unpleasant incident between them took place on monetary matter, but it did not antagonize them. In 1687, Edison entered Queen's College, Oxford, where he earned fame for his Latin compositions. Here, on the recommendation of Dr. Lanchester, he was elected into Magdalen College at Deming. His early literary attempts. When Edison entered Oxford, he had already begun to show his interest in Latin composition. His attempt did not center on mere imitation, but he was trying to form his own style through his classical studies. His interest in English composition first revealed in his verse addressed to Dryden, and also his translation of a major part of Virgil's Fourth Georgic upon bees. Among his early literary exercises were the argument prefixed to several books of Dryden's Virgil, his sketch of several English poets which appeared under the title Account of the Greatest English Poet, and a few other prose pieces and complimentary address in verse. His continual tour. Edison's poem to King William with a verse introduction to Lord Somers and a Latin poem on Racwick earned him a pension of 300 a year, which enabled him to travel on the continent with a view to a diplomatic employment, and also, as some critics are of the view, to study and cultivate the art of diplomacy. Leaving England in 1699, he spent nearly 4 years in France, Italy, Australia, Switzerland, Holland, and Germany. While in Italy, he wrote his most elegant letter to Lord Halifax on hearing of the death of Henry III, which caused him the loss of his pension. He returned to England at the end of 1703. His other literary achievement. With the death of Henry III, Addison fell on evil days. He had to take shabby lodgings in the Haymarket and was obliged to adopt tuitioning for his subsistence. However, he was warmly welcomed by the faithful Steele and other friends, including Tonson, who introduced him to the big coterie known as the Kit Kat Club. The Battle of Blenheim in 1704 provided Addison a fresh opportunity of distinguishing himself. Through Halifax, he was commissioned to compose a poem in celebration of the victory of Blenheim. The poem, The Campaign, which took the nation by storm, secured for him the succession of John Locke as a Commissioner of Excise and under Secretaryship of State. In 1705, he published his remarks on several parts of Italy. The popular taste for operas inspired him to write one entitled Fair Rosamond. Soon he was returned as MP for Lost Bethel, and at a later stage he was made Secretary for Ireland and finally Secretary for State. When in 1709 Steele began the publication of the Tatler, Addison was in Ireland, but he became a contributor thereafter. He with Steele started the Spectator, the first number of which appeared in March 1st, 1711 and 1713. Appeared Cats, a tragedy produced at Drury Lane Theatre. This drama was received with acclamation by both Whigs and Tories and was followed by the Comedy of the Drummer. Addison also contributed to Steele the Guardian. However, his last undertaking was the Freeholder, a party paper published twice a week. His later life. The latter event in the life of Addison did not contribute to his happiness. In 1716, he married the Countess Dowager of Warwick, to whose son he had been a tutor. The marriage was an unhappy one, for his wife was arrogant and imperious. His stepson was a rake and unfriendly to him. Besides his unhappy family affairs, he had quarrels with his such good friends as Pope, Swift, and even Steele. In his public capacity, in his invincible cynicism made him ineffective in the Parliament. Moreover, his health by now had begun to deteriorate. Consequently, he resigned his office in 1718, and at Holland House on July 17, 1719, he passed away. Summary: the exercise of hands. The letter. The Spectator informs the reader that he has received a letter from the correspondent on the topic of an academy that he has started to impart training to aspiring ladies in the proper use of the fan. The Spectator decides to present the letter to the readers. The fan as a weapon. The correspondent starts his letter by remarking that fan can be compared to sword since the functions of the fan are like those of a sword. To a great extent, fan is more powerful than the sword. Men are taught the art of sword play in the expensive academies, but women do not get such type of facility. The correspondent declares that his aim to supply the deficiency and opening up an academy for teaching the art of using the fan in the most effective as well polished manner. He explains the basic movement in the art. First, handle your fan. Second, unfurl your fan. Third, discharge your fan. Fourth, ground your fan. Fifth, recover your fan. Sixth, filter your fans. Later on, he explains the meaning and purpose of each movement. He also tells the readers about the time that an average lady will take in mastering that particular stage in the training. Handling of the fan. It is the first stage in the training. The regiment of young ladies is drawn up in a spacious hall. Then the words of command are delivered. Handle your fan. On hearing this command, each lady shakes her fan at the instructor with a smile. She then gives a tap with the fan on the shoulders of the woman of her right, presses her lips with the end of her fan, lets her arms fall gracefully to her sides, and then stand in readiness for the next command. The correspondent opines that this stage can be completed in a week since the fan is not to be opened for it. Unfurling. Unfurling the fan is the second step in the training. This action includes many flaps and vibration as well as deliberate opening and closing of the fan. It requires 1 month if one wants to learn it completely. This part of the training is very delightful to watch because when the fans are unfurled, the design on them, cupids, garlands, birds and weeds are displayed to view. Every member of the regiment is seen to be holding a picture in hand, discharging the fan. In order to emit a loud report, the fan is opened with a swift movement. This movement is known as the discharging of the fan. The correspondent states that with a suitable wind, the crack of the opening of the fan can be heard from a considerable distance. Indeed, this part of the exercise is not simple, but the correspondent assures that he has been able to teach young ladies who were able to produce a pop that could be heard at the other end of the room. To manage the case a crack which contains the sound of pistol shot, the ladies are also instructed to act in proper manner. The correspondent has invented a special fan which consists of enclosed air. With the help of a young lady can produce a sound as loud as the sound produced by a mature lady who uses an ordinary fan. Grounding the fan. After the action of discharging the fan, the order to ground the fans is given. This may become an important thing in real life. When a lady desires to throw her fan aside in order to take up a pack of cards, adjust a curl of hair or a pin. This part of training can be learned without any difficulty because it contains only the single movement of tossing the fan onto a long table. Recovering the fans. In the process of fan drill, recovering the fan is the next stage after the fans have been grounded. The ladies are told to walk gently for some time. Then they come to their weapons suddenly and take their fans in no time. When the instruction to recover the fan is given to them, the correspondent opines that this stage can be learnt easily. Fluttering the fans. The climax of the fan drill remains in the action of fluttering the fan. This stage can be learned by a lady in about 3 months. Only that lady who is sincere towards her work can learn it perfectly. This part of training is given to the young ladies in the summer season, since the fluttering of many fans produces a number of breeze which may cause harm to the ladies in other seasons except summer. The language of the fan. The fluttering of the fan also causes a sound which may be called the language of the fan. The fluttering of the fan expresses the mood of the owner of the fan. It exhibits anger, timidity, and a moroseness of human being. The fluttering can reveal very well whether the lady's mood is jovial or pensive. According to the character of the woman, the fan can also be a prude or a coquette. Conclusion. The instruction in the art of bedding. The fan declares that he has written a treatise on the art of fan drill. He calls it the passion of the fan. He informed that he is going to hold the mass parade of the young ladies on next Thursday. He asked the spectator to come and view it. In a postscript, he also conveys an additional information that he also holds a class where he provides the young man with the art of gallanting the fan. He says that the fans used for this purpose are very cheap and ordinary. Critical remarks. Edison pretends that he has received a letter from a correspondent who established an academy to teach the young women of the use of fan. Edison states that he does not know whether the letter represents the courteous behavior or it is a satire, but the fact is that it is both. Through the representation of the behavior of the fashionable ladies of the society of the 18th century, Edison presents satire on the follies and vanities of the young ladies. In those days, fan was an important part of young ladies' attires, as the snuff box was the part of the dress of the gentleman. In fact, to have the fan was a custom imparted from the court of France. Edison's remark on the flirtatious behavior of the fashionable ladies of his time is not harsh, but it is very gentle. He is also satirical about the important activities and the trivialities of the common life. Since Edison's outlook regarding the ladies' follies is positive, he hopes that ladies would give up ideal accomplishment like using a fan in most effective manner so as to win the hearts of the gallants of his time. Summary. Ladies headdresses. Variable structure heading है. Ladies headdresses are the most variable structure that human beings have ever made. Sometimes they have reached enormous height, making women look much taller than men who looked but as grasshopper before them. The writer remembers some ladies who rose to the enormous height of 7 feet because of the superstructures that they constructed on their heads. At other times, headdresses turned to a smaller size. This gave a strange outlook to the ladies. They looked like trees that had been lopped and pruned so that they may sprout and flourish all the better. Artificiality. According to the author, headdresses were not only unnecessary but also unnatural. Women of all ages always pay more attention to their heads than men, but they do not pay their attention to the loss of propor- proportion, and they must not violate the modesty of nature. No one likes to feel humiliated by the sight of a woman who looks taller because of the artificial means by which she has increased her height by giving herself an enormous structure. The head plays an important role in the handiwork of nature. The human face, it becomes a cupola in a building. Gigantic headdresses only distract attention from the faces of human beings. Orders of the architecture. Heading है headdresses may be called a separate order of architecture which must be recognized and praised. Edison has known that the most ambitious headdresses were those in vogue in 14th century when their height was more than a story. This monstrous vanity of women was criticized by many preachers. First of all, the ladies were influenced by this criticism and they decided to discard their abnormal dresses and even to make a bonfire of them. But this influence was not permanent because the tall coiffures would reappear a month or two after the speech of the preacher. However, some preachers succeed in producing a strong public opinion against these monstrosities, so that at certain places their appearance would be greeted with jeers and even stones. Having a time for caution. The writer quotes an old saying that the time to establish law against the evil effect of power is only when there is a reasonable reason. On the same analogy, he thinks that the present time when ladies' headdresses are within controlled limits is the most suitable time for sounding a warning against the re- relapse of the order and artificial fashion. This he does by reminding his female readers that the head occupies the height as well as the most remarkable place in the human appearance. It surmounts the glorious human face, which is the handiwork of nature. It is like the cupola in a building. It is childish to build on these tall superstructures which not only seem to be absurd but also ruin the symmetry of human figure. Critical remarks. The writer's purpose is to expose the foibles of fair sex through gentle ridicule. He tells us about the fantastic headdresses that reveals their proneness to carry personal adornment to an extent where it became a vice. Here, Edison's method of satirizing ladies' follies differs from that of Swift. He does not forget to mix satire with humor. He also employs the gentlest kind of irony. Summary है A Vision of Justice. The writer, receiving a solitary walk in the garden of Lincoln's Inn, he was realizing discontentment at the sudden rise of many persons. He felt sorry at the unequal distribution of wealth, honor, and other blessings of life. He got lost in this thought. His mind was filled with a far more agreeable contemplation. Everything in nature helped him in his thought. As soon as he recovered from his usual temper and serenity of psyche, he went to rest. The evening meditation enabled him to dream a sweet dream. He saw an extraordinary light coming towards him. In a little time he distinctly saw the figure of a woman. He thought her to be an angel, but upon a nearer view he looked all the emblems with which the goddess of justice is usually The writer was very much influenced to look the goddess of justice. Her appearance was dreadful. She had majestic appearance, since was very beautiful, but she was to be loved only by those people who possessed powerful eyes to look her. She had a smiling look. Her smiles gave delight to all. Her enemies dreaded and all filled them with frustration. The writer saw that she was holding a mirror in her hand. She was filled with the same qualities and virtue which are generally presented by the painter when they paint the hand of truth. The goddess of justice turned the mirror in her hand. It brightened the heavens, the air, or the earth. She came down to be appeared and heard by mortal. The world was in an alarm. People gathered upon a spacious plain. A voice was heard from the clouds revealing the intention of her visit. The goddess of justice was to give appropriately to everyone living what was his due. All titles and claims to riches and estates should be immediately vested in the rightful owner. The goddess of justice turned the mirror of truth which she held in her hand. The rays of the mirror set fire to all lies and falsehood. A wonderful revolution among the people was appeared. The spoils of extortion, fraud, and robbery, with all the fruits of bribery and corruption, were thrown in a great pile. It was called the Mount of Restitution. All injured persons were invited to it to take what belonged to them. The next command was that all the posts of dignity and honor in the universe should be given to persons of the greatest merit, abilities, and perfection. With the help of the mirror, the select assembly was drawn up on all sides. They were present in three bodies. In the first, there were men of virtue; in the second, there were men of knowledge; in the third, there were men of business. In order to fill all the posts of honor, dignity, and profit, there was a line made out of each column of men. The second note was made out of such as were passed of any two of the qualifications. Those who were left and were only with one of them had their suitable post. Still there remained many places of trust and profit unfilled, so fresh drafts were made out of the surrounding people. Thanks.